Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It is Shabbat Chanukah. Ask any Jew how to observe Chanukah, and most will be able to tell you that for 8 days we kindle the Chanukah menorah, each night in an ascending order. That we eat either latkes or sufganiot, according to your taste, and we play dreidel. Ask the same group why we kindle the Chanukiah for 8 days, and the answer becomes a little less clear. Or as the great and revered Rabbi Seinfeld would say, it's complicated. In the common telling of the story, when the Maccabees liberated the temple area, they found that it had been made impure by the Hellenists, who offered sacrifices to their gods. The Maccabees dutifully cleansed and purified the holy places and turned their attention to the lighting of the menorah in the temple. The problem was that they had only enough purified oil for 1 day, and it would take time to receive the properly prepared oil. They chose to kindle the menorah anyway. And miraculously, it burned for 8 days, and then the pure olive oil arrived. Hence, we use a Chanukiah to celebrate the miracle of the oil, and with it, the triumph of the Jewish spirit. Like all things Jewish, there is another opinion as to why we celebrate the holiday for 8 days. It is offered in the book of Maccabees, which focuses its attention on the war fought between the Judeans and the Assyrians, between the Jews and the Hellenists. The writer, who it appears was an eyewitness, goes into significant detail about the battles. And at one point, he noted that the fighting took place over the period of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Shemini Atzeret. And because of the fighting, the observance of the holiday was impossible. After their victory, the Maccabees purified the temple and chose to observe the holiday of Sukkot in what we would think of as December. Including Shemini Atzeret, the 8th day of assembly, which makes for an 8-day festival. So you might ask yourself, why Sukkot? Why not Rosh Hashanah? Why not Yom Kippur? The answer was that Solomon dedicated the first temple on Sukkot. And the victorious Maccabees wanted to associate their rededication of that space the same way that Solomon did. There is no mention of the cruse of oil in the book of Maccabees. Just the courage of the fighting men and their God, who they believed, helped them to become victorious. Whether you focus on the miracle of oil or on the military victory of the Maccabees will likely depend on whether you are living in America, in the diaspora, or in the land of Israel. Jews living outside the land of Israel naturally shied away from talk of a military victory as they were powerless in the diaspora and chose instead to focus on faith and the miracle of a cruse of oil which burned far longer than it should have. This approach emphasizes the spirit and not the sword. And the end of our Haftarah this morning that we talked about earlier makes this point directly. Lo b'chayil v'lo b'koach ki im beruchi amar Adonai Tzavaot. Not by might, not by power, but my spirit alone, says the Lord of hosts. But the story from the book of Maccabees has been traditionally told in the modern state of Israel. Well before the state was established, people like Theodor Herzl saw the builders of the new Jewish homeland as modern Maccabees. Jews who were willing and able to fight to defend themselves, fight for their own homeland. And the story of the single cruse of oil was de-emphasized in order to focus on their military prowess. We may not have rededicated the third temple in our time, but we most certainly have returned and reestablished Israel as the Jewish homeland. On October 7th, the 8th day of that festival period, Shmini Atzeret, Israel was attacked. The land was defiled by grotesque acts of terrorism. More than 1,200 men, women, children, babies were slaughtered in unimaginable ways. Houses were burnt, and more than 130 hostages remain in Gaza today. Today, Israel is at war with the perpetrators of those crimes against humanity. Hamas, a terrorist organization dedicated to the destruction of Israel and ultimately of the Jewish people. This past week, I had the opportunity to visit the land of Israel with a JUF leadership group. Traveling to Israel in the days leading to Hanukkah, I fully expected the focus of the country to tell the story from the military lens. What I discovered was that while the country was certainly focused on the war, after all, everyone has a relative or a friend serving in the IDF, there is another miraculous story being told, a story of light. Israelis across the country are engaged in kindling the light of caring for one another. The illumination of the Jewish spirit pervades the country. Just as the priests of old did not wait until all the cruses of oil were in place before kindling the flame of the menorah, Israelis are not waiting until the government gets around to addressing the needs of a nation which has been traumatized. Presently, 250,000 Israelis are displaced in their own country. The manner in which Israelis are caring for them is the miracle of this Hanukkah. In a country whose symbol is the menorah itself, the actions of our people, the resilience of Israelis is sustaining its light. Consider the work of an organization called Pitchon Lev, dedicated to addressing the needs of those Israelis who have fallen below the poverty line. Their stated mission is to break the cycle of poverty in Israel. They not only supply people with food and clothing, but with education, counseling, and legal support. And when the war broke out, they used their skills, they used their resources to help soldiers in the field, military families, and those who are displaced. They put out the word for what was needed, and Israelis responded. At first, it was proper helmets and ceramic vests. Then it was mattresses for the soldiers to sleep on in the field. This organization didn't wait for the IDF, which had been caught off guard. They simply acted using their sophisticated network to put out the call. And then they began collecting food, clothing, toiletries for people who are out of their homes. Our group visited one of their warehouses, stocked to the ceiling with everything imaginable. Food, clothing, baby wipes, formula, all donated. Much by Israelis, but by Jews in America as well. They have such a sophisticated delivery system that clothing is delivered by size. Now, the thing about the warehouse that we visited is that it didn't exist on October 6th. And there are others just like it around the country. It works with the government, but is run by a civilian organization through private donations. That is a miracle. And there is light emanating from Pitchon Lev on this Hanukkah. Kfar Maccabiah, the Maccabean village, is located outside of Tel Aviv in Ramat Gan. Every 4 years, the second largest international sporting event in the world takes place there, the Maccabiah. It is a beautiful facility with hotels and living spaces for the athletes, meeting halls, boardrooms, and world-class sporting facilities. Since October 7th, Kfar Maccabiah has been dedicated solely to settling people displaced from the attack in the south. Where there were once meeting rooms, they are now classrooms as the children go to school. The athlete dormitories serve as housing for people who can no longer stay in their home for fear of attack, or maybe their houses were just burned. And the hotels, they are used for the families of hostages waiting for the reunion with their loved ones. In this place, there are professionals doing trauma counseling. On one of the fields, there are multiple tents set up, large tents. And in each of these tents, 3 people live for 3 days. And they receive immersion in trauma counseling. These tents are being used to help the survivors of the Nova Music Festival. To help traumatized individuals learn breathing techniques, yoga, and engage in specialized therapy to address the trauma that they have lived through. People have come from around the country to tend to these young people, and most of the people living there in Kfar Maccabiah just came with the shirts on their backs. So everything they wear is donated. The person leading us around said, you can tell who is displaced and who is a regular worker at Kfar Maccabiah. And here's how. In Kfar Maccabiah, you have 90 seconds to get to the shelter. The people living here now only had 15 seconds. They're the ones running whenever a siren goes off. Kfar Maccabiah is supported through private donations and is not connected to the government in any way. The light of the work being done there is also part of the Hanukkah miracle this year. We met with the leaders of Natal, an organization devoted to treating people with post-traumatic stress disorder. I serve on its board. Since October 7th, they went from receiving 100 calls a day to 5,000 calls a day. 5,000 calls. They receive calls from children whose mothers cannot get out of bed from post-traumatic stress disorder, from soldiers, from their families, people who are overwhelmed by the constant sirens and the stress that they are undergoing. The specially trained operators on the phone stay with these people for hours at times to help people gather themselves, to find the strength to function. They talk to children, and the children bring the phone to a parent who can't move, and they help them get up. The Chal is not a government agency, and its light forms part of the Hanukkah miracle this year. We visited Kiryat Gat, which is in the south, and it's Chicago's sister city in Israel. There are a series of new high-rise apartments that are just being completed. Instead of making those apartments available to the public, where such apartments are in high demand, the owner made a different decision. He's going to allow the survivors from kibbutz Nir Oz to settle there until their kibbutz is rebuilt. This is a private individual whose light of caring is part of the Hanukkah miracle this year. One last example. We met with Rachel Goldberg, who grew up here at Anshe Emet, whose injured son Hirsch was taken captive at the Nova Music Festival. Rachel has become the face of the hostage families, demanding the government do more for them, that the world not forget them. She has traveled to meet with the Pope and spoken at the United Nations. She is not a government official. Rachel is a mother who is fighting for her son. She has assembled a small army of people to help with the press and social media. As she said to the group, "I don't need hugs. I need help. I need advice." Rachel told us that she and her husband John traveled out of the country twice, once to see the Pope and once to go to New York to the United Nations. And they were afraid when they got on the plane that Hirsch might be released and they would be in another country. So Rachel Goldberg, being Rachel Goldberg, went to the pilot of the El Al flight. And she said to him, "What will you do if you learn that my son Hirsch has been released?" And the pilot didn't hesitate. He said, "We'll turn the plane around." Her spirit and that of the pilot are emblematic of the Israeli people, part of the miracle of the light of this Hanukkah. I need not mention that all the organizations I spoke about and many others have one thing in common. They are all generously supported by our JUF's emergency fund. Every person that we met with spoke with such gratitude about how quickly and generously our Chicago Federation has responded. All of us should be proud of the work that the Jews of Chicago are doing. as I boarded the plane to return home, I reflected on a trip where I thought that I was bringing chizuk, I was bringing strength to Israelis. And everywhere we went, people spoke of their gratitude for those who came. But the truth is, I received chizuk, I was strengthened by the Israelis that we met. They are so hurt, so depleted, so disoriented by the failures of the IDF and the government on October 7th. And there is so much anger. But as they say, those issues will be dealt with after the war. There will be a reckoning for those who so failed the country. For now, they are focused on the war, and this I heard again and again, that when it comes to Hamas, it's us or them. What I take back is the uniqueness of Israeli society, a country united in its resolve and its resiliency. In a new book entitled The Genius of Israel, Dan Signor and Saul Singer set out to answer that question. Where does this ability come from? They write of an Israeli attachment to something bigger than themselves, something higher. They quote Micha Goodman, a person that this congregation is familiar with. And they quoted him as saying this: Israel is a small country with a big story, big enough to give you meaning and small enough for you to have influence in it. The United States, Goodman elaborated, is a big country with a big story, but relatively few Americans will ever have opportunities to shape that story in significant ways. Every Israeli believes they have a role in the story of Israel, that they are making a difference, that it's up to them, whether it's their sons or daughters on the front lines, or providing food, clothing, housing, or counseling to those who are displaced. For the Israelis, the rabbinic phrase, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lazeh, is not a slogan. In Israel, it is a call to action. In a nearly empty airport, on my way home, I stopped and purchased an Israeli dreidel for the way home. Unlike American dreidels or the dreidels of the diaspora, which have the letters Nun, Gimel, Hey, and Shin, which stand for Nes Gadol Haya Sham, a great miracle happened there, Israeli dreidels have Nun, Gimel, Hey, and Pei. Po. A great miracle happened here. Holding the dreidel in my hand, I thought, and so the miracle continues. The light of the spirit of Israelis is being kindled across the country for a people who see themselves as modern Maccabees. The resiliency of this people is truly something to behold. The story of Hanukkah continues in our age, and they are writing it for us. I'm here to tell you that despite it all, the darkness of this moment, that the light of the menorah continues to burn brightly in our ancient homeland, and it is pointing the way to a better future for us all and for all those in that area of the world as well. Nes Gadol Haya Po. A great miracle is happening in Israel, right here in the land of Israel.